So hello everybody and welcome to this masterclass. Today our topic is Ancestry and Spirit of Ubuntu, or Spirit of Ubuntu and Ancestry. Once we look into that, I'll let you decide which you think is more important and which should come first. This is part of an offering from Cape Cacao, mainly because we are looking at everything related to the heart center. And when we start to work with the medicine of cacao in a connected way, in ritual and ceremony, as a daily practice, actually, we can do that. Then we start to cultivate more of this compassion, more of this, the other qualities of the heart, of love, of forgiveness, and of acceptance. And it's important that we step into the work with our ancestors coming from this space. So I thought it was quite a nice topic to bring in, with the understanding that we are looking at this from a loving space. So before I go any further, please join me in lighting a candle if you have one. And if you don't worry, I'll do this on behalf of all of us. Those who are getting the recording, you can maybe just pause me now and fetch your candle if you haven't yet got one and you would like to join me. So we do this at the start of all rituals, and I like to bring it in at the start of these masterclass topics as well. You're welcome to look at the flame, to look at me, close your eyes, whatever you're more comfortable with. And as we connect to this element of fire, we recognize that we're not only looking at or connecting to the flame externally that we are holding or that's in front of us, but that we are also connecting to our inner fire. It is the fire and this element that activates the spirit. And especially relevant for our topics today, we're working with largely the space of spirit. When we work with the medicine of cacao, it is the fire that activates that spirit. And so it's through the fire element that we can work a little bit deeper, more meaningful with our intentions, with our purpose here in this life, or to find that if we haven't yet. And so I invite you to take a few deeper breaths, just really connecting to that element of fire. We can connect a little further back to the sacred fire that we were once all connected to through our ancestors. The sacred fire that we sat around as a tribe. The space of the circle around that fire. That safe space where we are all one. Where we share openly. Where we are heard, and where we have a purpose of listening and supporting others through that process. This creates the connection between us and others. And so I'd like you to just allow that image or that thought or even a memory to settle down into your heart space now. Taking 2 more deep breaths before opening up your eyes. So much gratitude to the element of fire. And that image there might be one that is from this lifetime for some of us. It might be an image we have from a book, from a movie we've seen. It might be something very far-fetched for others. But when we start to look at our connection to our ancestors, when we go back, all people that we are connected to through our ancestral lines at some point relied on fire. Before our modern lives, when we have the safety of buildings and secure complexes or whatever it may be, and before we had electricity to cook our food on, we were very reliant on fire for protection and as well as for a heat source. So that, to think about that on a very, very basic level will help us stay connected to this topic today. So my invitation is for you to open up the space of the heart. And I was sitting before we started the masterclass, and I sat with my cup of cacao. So for those of you who know about working from this space, I'm just going to introduce cacao, then I'm going to introduce Ubuntu, and then I'm going to introduce Ancestry and go into a few kind of overlapping thoughts around these 3 topics. But before I do that, just to say that I've inquired into the heart space, and I've allowed myself to think about and engage in these topics in the healthiest way possible in my current situation. And I invite you to do the same. So whether you have a good or a bad, whatever your judgment is, connection to your living parents, maybe they're deceased, maybe there is no relationship, maybe there's a good one, maybe you see them every day, maybe you don't know even who they are. That's irrelevant for this topic. It will become relevant when we look at ways that we can start to work with healing, if that's interesting to you. But to understand the connection to our ancestors, you don't have to have a good or a bad relationship with your parents or your deceased ancestors. And so it's to keep reminding ourselves to come into the heart and to think about the broader perspective here. We are here to learn. We are here to hopefully engage in some stimulating discussions or thought processes later for ourselves. And this is something that you can do going forwards as well, especially if you're going to get into topics that might bring up some stuff for you, that might trigger some stuff. And I hope that some stuff is triggered today, because we all have shadow, we are all human, and we all carry ancestral shadow. So just to know that you are perfectly human, perfectly on track, if some of the topics or information does trigger you slightly. When we come from the space of the heart, I invite you then to step into being the spiritual warrior. And that spiritual warrior knows when to take action or when to not take action. And either way, it's done with the sword of love and the shield of compassion. So those are the attributes that come from the heart and from that spiritual warrior. And so you'll see I've also got lines on my face. And what I did just before starting the session is I actually called upon the ancestors, my ancestors. And when I say the ancestors, it's very general, because there's an activation we're going to do at the end of the session, an activation meditation, which will take you into the realization that we all have the same ancestors if we go back far enough. So to call upon my ancestors or the ancestors as well, to keep it quite broad. And a way that you can work very practically as of now is just to acknowledge your left hand and your right hand. Now, sometimes the screen is a little bit mirrored, so don't worry too much if I'm pointing with this and I say the opposite word to what you think it is. So with your left hand and your right hand, and you can do this with me now, it's just to bring them in front of you like this. And it's very helpful to do something quite physical with the body, especially in ritual, to get somatic with our rituals, get involved physically. So we have a left and a right hand. And we could say this is the feminine energy, which if you look at, or if you studied energy anatomy, you'll know that the left side generally is associated with that. And the right side is the masculine energy. And now when we say the words energy, that's quite neutral. All right, left energy, feminine, right energy, masculine. Now what if I said to you, your left hand is everything about your mother? Your right hand is everything about your father. You might have some opinions about that, or some judgments about that, some feelings about that. So let's just keep it to energy for now. Now, when you bring those hands together, this is the idea of Ubuntu. This is the idea of connection. And this is what we do when we come from the space of the heart. Also acknowledge how your hands are together. They're going through the arms, through the chest, and to the heart center. And so when we work with cacao, we are opening and expanding that heart center through our arms into our hands. So it should make much more sense now, while we actually go and embrace somebody when we meet them in our culture anyways. We give them a hug, part of the heart. We want to bring them in and create union, that idea of oneness. So you can close your eyes just for a moment. Connect again to that left hand that is touching the right hand that is touching the left. Acknowledge that you have these polarities. This is what it means to be human. You were born into these conditions. This is no one's fault. It just is. The ability to know polarity is part of our experience. And for so many traditions, and the idea with connecting to our ancestors and connecting to the spirit of Ubuntu and to cacao is exactly this, is to bring the left and the right together, these polarities, these opposites, and to find union, to complete this circle from the heart through the arms into the palms, so that everything is equal and everything is one. And so going forwards, may this gesture mean something a little bit more to you if it doesn't yet already. And then acknowledgement to that, to yourself, to your heart, and to those who have given you your life. Please just bow your head gently down. Take a nice deep breath there. And then you can gently open up your eyes when you are ready. So I'm going to introduce some practical ways as well that we can work with ritual to connect to our ancestors and to stay within this idea of Ubuntu, which I'm still going to explain. So lighting a candle, we've already done. Very simple. Connect to that fire that creates life, that sustains life, that activates spirit. And connect to this idea of, yes, we are human. Beautifully, beautifully, imperfectly human. We have duality, simply here and left and right. But we can bring the idea of unity and harmony together through this idea of bringing the hands together, connected through the heart space of love. So without further ado, let's get into our topic. I do have a few notes just so that I don't miss out on anything or get too sidetracked. For those of you who have joined any of my courses before or talks, you know that I tend to go off on some hopefully interesting tangents. But there's quite a bit I'd like to share with you today, so I don't want to go too off track. There'll be some time for questions for those who are on the live today, and for those who still want to email through some questions afterwards, you're welcome to. So the idea for this masterclass actually came pretty recently. It's a topic that I'd say it's a way, working with my ancestors, working with spirit and Ubuntu and this idea of humanity. We are all one. I'm going to look at a few definitions in a moment. I've been working with that, and so it's largely become part of who I am. I don't really think too much of it being something I need to practice anymore. It's just part of lifestyle, which is really beautiful. Yes, in the beginning, I learned ways. I found information. I practiced certain connecting techniques, did certain rituals. And after some time, it just became so beautifully engrossed in who I was and who I am. So I stopped really thinking about it too much. I just did it. I just, like walking. You learn how to do it and then you just carry on walking. You don't think about maybe talking about walking or having a masterclass about walking. So that's kind of where I'm coming from now. So it came up in this last training that I've been doing online, facilitating a shadow integration course. So it's for 4 weeks. It's pretty immersive, and we look at a bunch of topics around our personal shadow. Basically, if we just have to get a bit of context with this, it's understanding that our shadow is nothing that we want to get rid of. It's nothing bad. It's just parts of ourself, our psyche, our soul, if you like, depending on what language you'd like to use there, that we have disowned, that we are ashamed of, that we are embarrassed about, that we don't like, that we hate about ourselves even. It's basically the parts of ourselves that are still there. They're not going to go away. But it's the parts of ourselves that we are not yet willing to love. And that yet is very important because it says that we can. And so to integrate this and to bring healing and harmony back into our lives, we start to acknowledge the shadow and we slowly start to integrate it and bring it home. That takes time, of course, depending on how deep these shadows are, or how dark the shadows are, how deep the wounds or the traumas of the past are, or currently still are. So it was during that, especially with one of the modules that we looked at ancestral shadows specifically, that I thought, why not just go into this a bit deeper? It is always something, I've done this course a few times now, offered it a few times, and it's always around ancestral shadow that a few question marks come up. And quite a few triggers come up as well. Now, that's one way that we can definitely notice that we have shadow material. And everybody does, by the way. You might just call it something else or relate to it in a different way, but everybody has shadow. So it's when we are triggered, so when we have a heightened emotional response to something, whether it's on the more negative side or even super positive, then that is our shadow. So Carl Jung, the forefather of modern psychology, he actually said that 90% of our shadow is actually our gold. It's our hidden potential. It's quite a lot. Our greatness, our true power. And so most of us don't want to shine so bright. It's the fear of our own greatness. So our triggers aren't only going to be negative things. They can also be things where, yeah, it's actually pointing towards our gold. So during the ancestral shadow part of our shadow course, these triggers came up quite a lot. And so I thought just to expand on that, because when we, again, this was Jung, he said, if we want to, not fast track, because there is no real quick fix or no magic pill for anything, but he said, if you really want to cut to the chase with shadow integration, then one of two ways, and both if you can. Look at your ancestral shadow, start to work on that, and look at your sexual shadow and do some work on that. Now, when we start to look into both those topics, we actually see how merged they are. This idea of the collective sexual shame that we might carry from many generations. As soon as we say generations, we're speaking that also to our ancestors. Our ancestors were part of X generation and Y generation, and okay, wrong order, but you know what I mean, going back further and further into our history. And so there's a lot of shame around certain topics. So that's where the idea for this masterclass came, actually, and something that might be easier to relate to before we work with Ancestry is to understand Ubuntu. So for those in Southern Africa, this is nothing new, but just to quickly give some words or some understanding to that. It's a proverb in many, well, I would say, no, maybe not give it too much specific context, but in many traditions, that word is used, and all over Africa and actually all over the world, the concept is there. It's the concept of I am because you are. I exist because you exist. No man is an island, so to speak, as well. It's just a different phrase there. But Ubuntu specifically is one of the people. And so, again, those that understand from being part of the African context or the Southern African context will know that it's all about community. Everything that is done is for the benefit of the community, not the individual. So this is where a bit of a split comes, a bit of a tear in our woven thread of life when we have evolved into this modern Western culture that largely has become a bit of a ghost culture because of our disconnect to our tribe, to our community, to where we belong, to our original ancestors. And so this might bring a little trigger up at this point. And I'm sitting here very openly and honestly speaking to you as a white South African who also has looked into this because I started to get into ancestral work because I felt I didn't belong. I didn't know where my people were from. Sure, 3-4 generations now have been from South Africa. I'm full-on South African, but it's I'm very much in the minority of being a South African. So that's again a geographic location for ancestral work. So I started doing a bit of digging, and I found out, I actually do have some Khoisan in my ancestry, which is pretty recent. And then I have some German, and I have some Polish, and I have some Scottish. And so that's how I started, just being interested in where my people are from. And like I said, if we go back far enough, we originally come from the first tribes. And so some of you who are listening to me, if we go far back enough, we probably are related. So that's the beauty of also nowadays, we can find this on the internet, and there's lots of software out there that assists with this. And just the connection to many people all over the world. Those of you who have been on Facebook since way back when Facebook first started, for example, will know, how this goes. Like, so-and-so's got a friend, and so-and-so's got a friend, and I didn't know that. So that's how you end up finding your tribe, in the virtual space as well. So bringing it back. Check my notes so I don't get too off track here. The intention with this masterclass is to provide you with some information, some understanding, and that we can start to generate the qualities of the heart towards those who have come before us, our ancestors, with compassion, forgiveness, and acceptance. And again, this might bring up a little trigger as soon as I say forgiveness and acceptance, especially if you know about your ancestors and you're not too happy with how they behaved in the past or what they handed over to you in this life. The idea with all of this is so that we also, through this understanding and this forgiveness and this acceptance, over time, remember this stuff happens over time, we can actually live a more harmonious and a more authentic and a more lucid life. when coming back to the topic of shadow, when we start to remove the blockages that's causing the shadow, or causing certain shadow topics in our life, when we remove those blockages, we release so much more energy back into our psyche. Soul parts, for example, come home. We integrate more of ourselves. And that has a lot of power, a lot of energy. And so we start to live more. And of course, we step in more authentically into our lives. And we go out there less ashamed of who we are as well. I'm also going to provide you with some practical ways in which you can connect, in how you can walk across this bridge between the generations. Not literally, maybe some of you can generation walk, and that's wonderful, but just to do this through an intentional practice where you are working with a meditation or working with certain objects that you collect as you go on in your life that connect you to the idea of your ancestors, or the idea of your mother, or the idea of your father. So the idea is that we also heal and we move forwards with love. Okay, so that's very much coming from the space of the heart, which is why also working with cacao as a heart medicine is so wonderful when we go into these topics that, they're interesting, and then something comes up and we get triggered. Maybe there's a bit of fear there, maybe there's a judgment, maybe there's a bit of anger, and that's fine. Remember, you're human and these things are going to come up. So already just the fact that you showed up to be interested in this topic says a whole lot about you. It says you already are that spiritual warrior. So just remember your shield, your sword of love, and your shield of compassion. So these are 3 big topics in themselves. I could do a whole masterclass on just each one of them. Ancestry, spirit of Ubuntu, and cacao. But I'm going to try and join some dots for us today. The common thread with all of these, and if there's one thing you take away from this presentation or this talk or this discussion, is this common thread between all those 3 topics. And the common thread is heart. All of them have heart. No matter what your current circumstances are, or judgments, or beliefs, all 3 have heart. So let's remember the qualities of the heart as we continue. So our ancestry, I've noticed over the years that it's been coming out a lot more in it's quite a harsh word earlier. I said we have a ghost culture as our kind of more modern Western culture. But not everybody's a ghost. And I mean, I'm part of that culture and I don't feel like a ghost anymore, but definitely I did feel like a ghost for a while. Just a lack of where I belong, a lack of feeling like I had any purpose really, because of this lack of belonging. Because if we know where we've come from, we can have a better understanding of what we have right now. That'll give us the tools to go further, go forwards, instead of just being a ghost and kind of being in limbo. So the word ancestry, I've noticed, has picked up quite a bit of interest over the years, which is great. And I think it has definitely got like a novel idea to it as well, which is also great because that's generating some interest. Where I've noticed there's a bit of a misunderstanding though, is that your ancestors, yes, of course, they are from generations back. They go back, like I said, to the first people. But it's not only this disconnected link of here I am now in the present, and let's just skip a few generations because that's quite uncomfortable, mother, father, grandparents, siblings currently as well, maybe if you have those, and let's just go back to like the 1800s where I don't really know anybody. That's much easier to work with, what you don't know. It's just an idea, right? It's an idea of my great-great-grandparents. I don't really know what they did, or maybe I did, but I don't have a heart connection to them as much as I do my current ancestors. So we all have current ancestors. Let me rephrase that. Most of us have current ancestors. When I say current, it's living. Okay, so most of us have living ancestors. And maybe you don't. I'm going to speak right now to those of us that do have living ancestors, and then we'll go to the deceased ancestors. So if you have a sibling, they are part of your bloodline. They're part of your ancestry. Your parents, absolutely. And that's where you start. If you want to do some real good, solid ancestral foundation work, that'll set you up for then going back to the generations back, start with your parents. And that's what so many people don't want to do because that's the most uncomfortable. So many scenarios here. You can know your parents, both of them. You cannot know your parents, both of them. You can know one of your parents. You cannot know one. Perhaps both of your parents were your primary caregivers. Perhaps only one of them was a primary caregiver. Perhaps neither of them were primary caregivers. Perhaps one parent was part of the biological creation and the other one wasn't. For example, in homosexual couples, there'll have to be a donor and a carrier, and sometimes the one biological parent isn't part of the picture. So there's many scenarios we can work with here. You decide for you, who are your parents? Now, your blood parents, as much as possible, is a good way to start. So let's just use the example that's often used. Two parents, mother, father, known. Now, even within that, now I've given you so many other scenarios of how this can look. Even within that, a mother and a father, and they are known, they are still alive. There can be multiple different ways that we can connect or not connect. So I might have a really positive, good, healthy connection, relationship to my parents. And somebody with exactly the same situation of two known parents still alive might have exactly the opposite. We can still do ancestral work. It's not necessarily going to be any easier because we're going to be looking at what we have been given from our parents. And it is easy, of course, to focus on all the things that we've been given that don't work for us. So the triggers are going to come up quite strong and easy for this. So that's why it's so great to work with our parents. Because there's information right here. It's tangible. It's part of our life currently within the scenario that I'm presenting to you. Now, if there isn't any of that we can connect to, we can connect to primary caregivers, of course. But at some point, we would like to find our bloodline. And so you might want to start to do a bit of digging if you don't know your blood parents, or if you only know one and you don't know the other. And this is then, see this as part of your journey. This is part of the reason why you are here, is to find out and acknowledge. The way that we can continue this energy line flowing, even if we're not going to be having children of our own, is to acknowledge. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I feel it's important to mention now. Another topic that I'm very interested in is working around death and dying in a lucid way, in a healthy way, and largely being able to facilitate that process. So a death doula is kind of a word that is also thrown around there nowadays. And there's a gentleman, Stephen Jenkins is another guy. There's a gentleman now, I can't remember his name, but he's worked in this space. In the very medical space as well for a long time, and now he just assists with the death and dying process. And he's been at the bedside of so many people that are dying. And he was interviewed recently, and they asked him, what are people afraid of at that time? What are people most afraid of? And he said, they're not afraid of dying. They're not afraid of the pain. Nowadays, there's so much medication that can actually, just make us completely oblivious to the pain. So it's not around the fear. It's not around pain. The fear is not around dying. The fear is around being forgotten. And that just hit home to me. Even now, I can feel I'm getting a bit emotional. Because that's exactly what it is like if we're living as a ghost in a ghost culture, where we have lost our connection to our ancestors. We die and we are forgotten. And so what we can start to do is just start to find out about our ancestors in our own way. We don't have to go out and advertise it anywhere. If you feel like writing a book, go for it. If you want to start a family tree, that's also quite fun. But just to remember, keep the memory alive so that those people aren't forgotten. So let's come back to these scenarios of how we can start to work with our ancestors. The idea with all of this is we start looking at what our triggers are, because that'll speak to our shadow. And especially if we're wanting to start to do some healing around this, notice the triggers. And those of you that have done some shadow integration work will know what comes next. So we identify our triggers. What are our judgments about these parents or this parent? What don't we like about them? What irritates us so much? What are we angry about? What can't we forgive yet? What harm has been done to us, whether it was intentional or unintentional, whatever it may be. You can even start a list. And then you read through that list again and you say, what of those are true about me? And again, I'm going to give you some information here that also might bring up a bit of a trigger. What we recognize in our parents, most of the time, is what we have in ourselves. That's been passed down to us, and we recognize it because it's so strong in us. And that's not a comfortable thing to chew on. It really isn't. Because it speaks to so much against what we've been conditioned into believing about ourselves, or what we've been conditioned largely into striving for. Perfection. Healed. Got it all under control. An adult, which might mean a whole bunch of things to you. But remember, you're always going to be someone's child. And you are a human. That's why I started this session saying we are a human here, and the conditions of being human is that we are dual. There's this dualistic nature that is absolutely conditional with being a human being. So that speaks to joy, it speaks to pain, it speaks to suffering, it speaks to happiness, it speaks to these polarities in our emotions and our experiences that we have as we go. So that's true to us, that's true to our parents as well. Now, most of the time, they were honestly doing the best that they thought, that they knew, given their conditions and given their circumstances. And I have a wonderful relationship with my parents. I'm still triggered so much by them. So I can only imagine someone who doesn't have a good relationship. And yes, I've worked with a lot of people like that who don't have great relationships with their parents or who don't know their parents. So when we don't know our parents, we can then start to go back a generation, grandparents. If we don't know our grandparents, we can try to go back. So that's why you might want to start doing some digging into your family tree. Now, if none of that's available to you, work with the idea of the father archetype and the mother archetype, but not only the positive qualities. Because the father archetype, the masculine archetype, is there as a protector. Against all odds, will protect. And sometimes that means that there is a lack of emotional connection because protection is primary. Now I'm giving a very, very generalized idea of the masculine and of the feminine. And the idea of the feminine is to nurture and nourish. But that also will have a polarizing quality that might not be so comfortable to look at. So that's for you to go explore. But I'm sure we can all find within us, whether it was through a primary caregiver or an actual parent, some form of trigger, just to start. If you're wondering, oh, how do I start working on healing my ancestral connection? Well, that's it. And why do we do this? It's the understanding that we are trying to see that I am here because of you. So here's the connection now to the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because you are. Now this is directly true of you sitting here today. You are the combination of a sperm and an ovum. Biologically speaking, that's what you are a result as. And that comes from two people. Now, not both of them might be your parents, but maybe they are. It's because of two people that you are sitting here today, biologically. And so you are because they are. And just within that little triad, wow. Now, within that triad of the sperm, the ovum, basically mother line, father line, and you, hopefully we can all find gratitude. Just gratitude for being alive. You would not be alive today if it wasn't for them. Sure, there's layers that come onto that as well. And things we're going to be triggered by, and relationships that have gone south maybe, and experiences that have made this web very rich in all its polarities and in this dualistic sense of opposites. But just to notice that on that very primal understanding, basic understanding, you are alive because of your parents or because of these two people. And there's going to be an activation at the end of this that we'll expand on that a bit further. This idea of Ubuntu, the spirit of Ubuntu, also speaks to expanding on. There's also another saying in Africa that it takes a village to raise a child. And yeah, so especially single parents that have to work, that don't have family around, will definitely say, yeah, I can totally relate to that. So this idea of community, yeah, I'm not going to speak too much more about that, but there's many, many links into this idea of the spirit of Ubuntu, the spirit of the people, that we are because of each other, and how that has to come from the ancestors. First and foremost, they gave us our lives. So let's start there. We are because they gave us this. So we can have gratitude for that on the most basic level. So if ancestral shadow is something that's interesting to you, I would advise trying to do some information, trying to learn about this in a safe environment, given a lot of context. It doesn't have to be the course that I offer, but there are many, many practitioners that are offering courses out there. And it's a wonderful way of really empowering yourself with knowledge. And if it's a shadow integration course, definitely with practices. In my opinion, shadow work is not shadow work unless there are integration practices. Otherwise, it's just information we know and we don't embody it. And things don't actually start to shift then. And how we start is we start small. Like I said, we start with our siblings and we start with our parents. We start with our immediate family. And then, of course, we go back. We go into already working within our parent space. We'll start to notice how we are all conditioned within a certain community or a certain culture, a certain era as well, a certain location. Like I say, I'm in South Africa here. So there's certain conditions that are also part of that, this immediate ancestry. And this starts to feed into the collective as well. Those of you who also are interested in shadow work, ancestral work, and collective work, start to observe your dreams. If you don't already have a dream practice, keep a little journal next to your bed. Have a glass of water as an offering to your dreaming mind before you go to bed, and observe. When you have a dream, record it, write down, and read over that over time. You'll find some interesting snippets of information coming. And then you can also find some themes, especially if you're setting an intention to connect to your ancestral energy. And be specific. Maybe it's going to be your mother's line. Maybe it's in your father's line as well. You can start to work with that over time. So that's just a little side note. As we work with healing the ancestral lines through the idea of wanting to find more of this Ubuntu, it's like stitching together this torn fabric. And I've already said this, the fabric of life. So there's going to be many tears, right? You are human. You come here with imperfections. And we will always be imperfect as long as we are human. So let's embrace that. But we don't have to also use it as an excuse for our lives. We can start to find more harmony as we go and be less destructive for ourselves and for others. But the idea with doing ancestral work and ancestral healing is through this connection of one stitch at a time, we start to mend those wounds or those tears in the fabric. And that fabric is the fabric of life. So when we do that for our ancestral line, we are helping that entire web. We are going to be healing those wounds through, remember, the work of compassion. The qualities of the heart also are forgiveness and acceptance. So that also might not be a stage that we are ready to be in yet, but we can just start with understanding and compassion. All right. When we start to look into this as well, it is important that we have a safe support structure around us, because when we start to look at our own ancestral shadow, like I said, we are looking into the collective ancestral shadow as well. And this brings up a whole lot of ugly stuff. We start to look at how we are as a community and how we have been as a community in the past, as a tribe, if you connect to a certain tribe, as a people, as a population, as a race. Humanity's got a lot of shadow there. So as soon as we start starting to wanting to go down this line, yes, it will bring more connection over time. But we do have to face the shadow. We have to face the ugly truths as well. And yeah, the dreams, I just want to highlight that as well, because the ancestors are not going to come to you necessarily and show themselves in an ethereal spirit body and give you a very clear message. It's going to largely be through tapping into unconscious space. Again, I bring in Jung psychology here. The tip of the iceberg, above the surface, that's our conscious understanding. That's our waking state right now as we are connecting. When we go to sleep and we engage with our dreams, when we bring in deep meditation, when we work with other shamanic practices, we go under the surface. And with iceberg theory, most of it, 90%, is underneath. So listen to those messages. They're not going to be listening from the ear. It's going to be listening from the heart. So the dreams, there's going to be messages there as well. Working in a meditation practice, for example, with cacao is a wonderful way just to also open up the ear of the heart so we can listen from that space. Just one more thing I want to mention before some practicalities. When we look into the space, what's going to be really beneficial for those of you who want to start practicing this connection, already do, but are finding is a bit of stagnation that's coming in. I want to provide you with something that maybe you've thought of before, maybe you even practiced, but maybe it's completely new. And it's something that all people have known, all people have connected to through this idea of the people, of being connected to other, that we are not solely an individual and have to only worry about ourselves. So the idea is sacred reciprocity, or spiritual reciprocity, if you like. It's the idea that you give before you receive. So if you're going to start any ancestral practice, any ancestral work, any work calling in the spirit of Ubuntu, it's a really good idea that you come in humbly, as if you were speaking to real live people, and as if they were some great wise elders. Maybe a friend you haven't seen for so long and you're so happy to see them. They invite you over to their house. You don't arrive empty-handed. You go with some flowers, some chocolates, whatever it may be. Same thing here. So you can think of your ancestors being the epitome of the greatest grandmother, the greatest grandfather, and you're going over to them. And you want to take them something nice. So the idea with spiritual or sacred reciprocity is we are giving of ourselves first. So we come empty-handed, open-minded, empty-handed. Only then do we have space to receive. When our plate is too full, when our cup is too full, we can't put any more in there. So starting to cultivate this attitude of sacred reciprocity. So we give of, and here's some practical ways now that we can start to work with this space. It'll also help us expand into the heart and to be able to work or receive or connect to. Sure, we're going to get triggered, but just enough. Not a heightened response of trigger. So not as much fear, if there might be a little bit of fear there. We won't get so incredibly angry that we completely miss the message. We won't be able to not forgive. We won't be able to not feel. We want to be able to step into that space gently and go, okay, I'm ready to connect. So we recognize the sacred reciprocity is needed. And here is where, again, this is misunderstood. The way that we can connect through song, through dance, or through any kind of music, the power of that to connect us to our ancestors. It's connecting us to something tribal, something that is of the human element, our element of earth. Connects us to a beat of the drum. And I actually have my medicine drum here as well, and towards the end I'm going to use it. This drum beat doesn't have to be the drum beat, but the drum beat is said to connect us to when we were back in the womb. And for those 9 months roughly, we heard 2 heartbeats. We heard that of our own and that of our mothers. When we are born, duality sets in. We are then conditioned to live within these polarities in a dualistic nature. But when we hear the drum beat, when we hear this drum beat, that connects us back. It takes these polarities and brings them together. It is the circle. Drums are most of the time, always actually circles, no matter what form they are. And so it's that connection again that we are wanting to find through all this work. And so we give of ourselves first. Now, you don't have to be a musician. You don't have to have a drum. It's to find your own, what I call your heart song. And that can be through just a prayer that you offer up. It can be through an exhale, but a really conscious, intentional exhale. The next exhale is going to be to connect to my ancestors, an offering. Because when we exhale, it's giving of our life force. It's the last thing we do before we leave this human form. The first thing we do when we come into the world, we breathe in. But when we exhale, we are offering of our life. I can speak very poetically about the breath, but I'll bring us back. So connect through song, through your voice, even if it's in the shower. It doesn't matter what it sounds like to the ear. What is the heart saying? And that's why so many cultures all over the world, they pray. They bring their hands together. They sit there or they kneel there. They pray. So again, just finding your own way around this. But definitely working through your voice. When we sing, it's on an exhale. Nobody sings as they inhale. It's on an exhale. There's life force that is given for this. And so we give of ourselves. And that's a very beautiful way, through music or through sound or through an instrument, that we are offering up. We sit in ritual, which is really, really helpful. Light a candle. You can call in a protective energy layer around you. If you know how to cast a circle spell, then do that. Just something where you are contained and you can feel that that space is being amplified, and so that you are also connecting a bridge from the world here into the spirit world. If you have a sacred space or a shrine, then just to put an offering there, and maybe even a representation of a figure of something that represents the father line and something that represents the mother line. Now again, through your searching around this, you might find something that your mother gave you or your grandfather gave you, and so that could also be there. It can be in nature as well. When we are in nature, it's just so beautiful already. Nature is the beautiful harmony of the masculine and the feminine. And then if you have any spiritual practices or daily routines, you can dedicate them to your ancestors as well. You can dedicate them to the spirit of humanity, to this shared life that we are all interwoven into. So again, connecting to the ancestors, connecting to spirit of Ubuntu there. We're connecting this from our heart. Every time we do something with our hands, just bringing them into prayer position, remember that's the gesture. It's coming from the heart space. And then there's a meditation that I'm going to take us into now that is going to hopefully just activate this line to the ancestors. Remember, it's not about any good or bad relationship, knowing or not knowing parents or ancestors. It's about consciously stepping in and wanting to. Your intention has got to be there, wanting to connect, and find out for yourself why. What is your bigger motivation behind this? It will provide you with a more harmonious life. It'll provide you with a more knowledgeable existence as well. And if you're wanting to heal some wounds of the past, it's absolutely going to happen as well. So there's many reasons why you might be interested in this topic, and you might not do anything with this. You might choose to. So try look at that. What is your bigger motivation for this? And then each time you step into a certain practice or start your day, greeting the sun maybe, or at the sunset, maybe just offering up an intention to want to connect to your ancestors, to the people around you, and to your own heart. So for this next meditation, it's not going to be too long, but you can absolutely expand on it again in your own time once you kind of know how it works. I invite you to lie down or just to sit back and get comfortable. Close your eyes. I'm just going to put my camera off just so that I'm not a distraction, and then I'm just going to talk you through this. So we'll start by taking a few deep breaths again, in and out, just to relax into the body. It's important that we try to relax as much as possible before we enter into going with the mind. Allow your exhales to settle you down. And if there is that intention that is already genuine, you're welcome just to think of those exhales as an offering to connect to the ancestors. And if you're ready to make it personal, connect to my ancestors. You'll say that to yourself, of course. So Your exhale is to connect to your own ancestors, your words being, I exhale to connect to my ancestors. Allowing your breath to be natural now. And if you'd like to just think about, before we go into the meditation, just think about why you are interested in this topic, or why you would want to start some of these practices. Is it for healing? Is it for understanding, for connection? And if that's unclear, it's still fine. Maybe you can set an intention to discover why. Why is this resonating with you at the moment? Maybe your intention is to find clarity. And so we're just going to go into an exploration now. An ancestry exploration. Starting with ourselves right here, right now, in this present moment. Become familiar with your left shoulder and with your right shoulder. Allow yourself to have space behind you in the non-physical realm, almost as if whatever you are leaning against or sitting against is a barrier between the physical space now, this current reality, and the bridge into other realms behind you, the past. And so behind you, on your left shoulder, behind you, behind your left shoulder, is standing your mother. Her hand is on your shoulder, and she is there, supporting and loving you. Next to her, behind you, behind your right shoulder, stands your father. He too has a hand on your shoulder. And he's standing behind you with his hand on your shoulder, in love and in support. And just notice what it feels to be here in this present moment, with this world behind you, this realm behind you that is merging between current and past. Notice the energy of your mother, the energy of your father as they stand behind you, supporting and loving you with their hands on your shoulders. And now behind your mother, so on your left shoulder behind your mother, the same image appears. Her mother stands behind her to her left. Her father stands behind her to her right. And each of them have a hand on her shoulder. So these are your grandparents on your mother's side. Now you don't necessarily have to have a face or an image for them. Just know that they are there. And now behind your father on your right side, the same there. His parents stand behind him, again respectfully holding his left and right shoulders. Your grandparents on your father's side. And so behind you now, your two parents, your four grandparents, each in turn supporting and loving. Through hands, through hearts, connecting. Take yourself back to your left shoulder, back past your mother, back past your grandparents. And now behind each of them are their parents. So another four people appear, another four spirit bodies appear. Your great-grandparents on your mother's side, the same configuration there of how they are standing, with hands on shoulders, in love and in support. Take your awareness to your right shoulder, through your father, through his parents, your grandparents. And behind them as well appear another 4 spirit bodies, your great-grandparents on your father's side. And they too have hands on shoulders, hands connected to the heart in love and in support. Now you can imagine that getting more and more and more as each of these lines, left and right, give parents onto each of the parents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents coming into the picture. And take this web further back, exponentially growing the amount of people that have come before you, that have come here with love and support. Take that as far back as your imagination can stretch. Right the way back, until all of a sudden you are connecting with all the other people and their protectors and their ancestors, those people that are currently living. At some point, if we all had to be imagining this, we would be overlapping in this web, this fabric. That's how much support you have behind you. That's how much love you have behind you. That's how connected you are. And so when we give thanks to our ancestors, we are giving thanks to humanity that has come before us. We are giving thanks to this spirit of connection, of Ubuntu. We are because you are. We are because they are. And so take that image again right the way back, as far as your imagination can stretch. These people were pure. They were connected. They knew who they were. They were connected to nature. They relied upon nature. And so all that wisdom now, that ancient wisdom, they're going to start to infuse through their hearts, through their arms, into their hands, and onto the shoulder of the person in front of them. You can imagine a color now coming down, back, slowly through all of those people, all of those hands, all of those hearts connected, all the way back. Let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to the great-great-grandparents. Let's bring it back to the great-grandparents. Bring it back to your grandparents. Bring it back to your parents. Connect to those 2 hands on either shoulder, from your left side, from your right side. And notice that activation coming. Notice that ancient wisdom coming. Allow it to rest in your heart. And now you can imagine your left hand coming forwards, your right hand coming forwards into a prayer position in front of you. If you feel comfortable moving your arms, you can do that keeping your eyes closed so that you can take that gesture. Otherwise, just imagine it. That activation will always be there now, down that left shoulder, through that left arm into the hand. Down that right shoulder, through that right arm to the hand. The final part that you have to play is to activate that heart center of yours. Love, compassion, forgiveness, understanding, acceptance. And infuse that now from the heart center, across the shoulders, down through the arms, and into your hands. May this gesture remind you to give thanks for the life you have, for the support you have, and for a purpose that you may or may not know right now, but for the reason you are alive. You too have a place, and you too are part of this spirit of Ubuntu. invite you to take a few deeper breaths in and out as you start to dissolve the image behind you. As you allow your skin to become its natural color, as you allow the space behind you to become solid again, the entire space around you to become of this reality. If you're still holding your hands together, you may just lightly start to move them, feeling the sensation between your palms, remaining in your earth body, in this human form that you have been gifted by your parents. And so find that gratitude in your heart, and may that guide you forwards. Please take your time to deepen into your breath while you allow this meditation to dissolve. Take as long as you need. When you are ready, you can slowly blink your eyes open. Just take a few more moments. Just noticing how you are feeling. So I'm just going to put my camera back on. So these meditations can be expanded upon. They can be quite deep and quite beautiful. We can go and receive information that way as well, or we can remind ourselves of the good qualities that have been passed down to us as well. So just in closing, I'd like to just mention a final word on Ubuntu. And it was what I was ending off with towards the end of that activation, is that Ubuntu speaks to each person. It speaks to you having a role in this tribe of life, in your society, in your community, in your family, in the world. One cannot exist alone. Sure, we can be independent and we can just strive for equality in all ways, but we each have a role. And everybody is needed. So just like I am because you are because I am. It works both ways. And we all have to rely on each other if we are to go forwards with all these qualities that the heart speaks to. Because Ubuntu speaks to sharing, and it speaks to shared experiences. And shared experiences are so much more connected with other human beings than an experience alone. Although our experience with spirit is also of a singular nature, but even that is not in isolation. So thank you very much for being open to listening to a few reflections on these topics, which are so big within themselves: and ancestry, spirit of Ubuntu, of the people, of humanity, and of cacao. If you're interested in knowing any more, then you are welcome to connect. Just pop me a few questions via email, or if you would like to know how to further this and you're interested in taking it further into any of the kind of branches that I mentioned, if I can't help you, I can always try to refer you to somebody else. So I'm going to end the live recording, and then for those who have questions who are on the live, then you can please ask those.